We have always stated that our independence cannot be complete if in fact there is any part of the world where the black man is not accorded his rightful position in society.
Yeah, I think the first thing you should know about Mboya is that he was born in a particular environment which made him not value being a Luo very much. His father, of course, had been forcibly recruited under what they used to call agreement, but the Luo call ogrimiti. Taken to Ruiru, near Beka, to work on sisal plantation. That's where Mboya was born. He learned Kikuyu, learned Kamba, not later on learned the Luo, Kiswahili in English. Went to some primary school in Ukambani, learning a lot about the Kamba. So here is somebody at a time when most people were brought up in their own communities, being brought up on a sisal plantation, and then later on, largely by Kikuyu, Kamba, and later on, he came to St. Mary's from Kamba, he came to St. Mary's here, and then from there, of course, the father could not afford, went to train as a. So here is somebody who has a background different from most Africans at that time, who were brought up in their own area and went to their school in that area. So that's the first major distinction. When he finished training at Kabete as a sanitary inspector, he was employed by Nairobi City Council. That's the daytime Mau started. And most African leaders were arrested. Some detained, some killed.
To Africans, the Mau Mau were freedom fighters, but to the Europeans, they were terrorists.
For it is that band of fanatics whose bloody deeds have cast a dark shadow across the face of Kenya.
The British used the police and army to round up suspects from the Kikuyu villages. They dropped 50,000 tons of bombs to try to destroy their camps. The Mau Mau who tried to shoot down the British planes were celebrated as folk heroes. The Mau Mau concluded there was no alternative to violence. They used homemade weapons to terrorize European settlers, attacking isolated farmhouses and police stations. Many Africans opposed the violence, including Jomo Kenyatta. Despite a lack of evidence, he was accused of Mau Mau links and imprisoned. 80,000 suspects were detained and interrogated.
So he suddenly found himself in this vacuum again. Yeah, and he volunteered to be Director of Information and Acting Treasurer. Of course, people like Odede and Mboya had tried. Odede was again also cleared and detained. So most people feared having anything to do with the cow. Less to go.
When Mau Mau was on the rampage and Jomo Kenyatta was given the image of a monster, because his own image was so ghastly in the sight of whites, the image of Tom Mboya immediately became acceptable. Because Kenyatta seemed to be so irresponsible, Mboya became responsible. He became acceptable, responsible, and made everybody happy. So they supported him. They backed him up, made him prominent throughout the world. Kenyatta made him. He didn't make himself. And he was intelligent enough to know it. So when Kenyatta got out, he supported Kenyatta. He realized that the contribution of Kenyatta made him what he was. And because he was intelligent enough, he was blessed with sufficient insight to see the role that Kenyatta and the Mau Mau played in his own prominence, an image of respectability and acceptability. He continued to support Kenyatta.
So it becomes the Joint Trade Union, again, which is not tribal. It's a group which has been led by people like Mackenzie and Kubai. Those who had been, most of them had been detained. But even those who are still there, it was all Kenyan. So there's nothing low about that trade union organization from a person who really was brought up by everybody. He hasn't acquired this closeness to the Luo or to anybody else. And his whole background is that. I think that is crucial in Ghana. In fact, Mboya only became a Luo in death. He was never Luo.
Will you press for the release of Jomo Kenyatta?
Certainly, yes.
How?
Again, by intensifying our efforts and more pressure on the British government and also the Kenya government, and using whatever influences we've gained from this present constitution for further efforts to secure his release.
What's your view of Dr. Nkrumah's vision of a union of the whole of black Africa?
I am quite sure that every African leader would like to see a greater and closer relationship between the various African territories and the various African states.
Do you believe that one day Kenya will be governed by Africans?
I believe that one day Kenya will be governed by a democratic government, representative and elected by the people. And by the people, I include anybody who decides to make Kenya his home.
In how many
and
years?
who accepts to be treated as an equal citizen with everybody else.
Well, Mr. Mboya, it's hard for small nations to live alone. Do you hope for your country a federation with other small African, middle African nations? What is it that you want for the future?
The All African People's Conference discussed this whole question of federations or a United States of Africa. And we are being realistic in this matter by our decision at Accra that certain regions constitute workable units that might be treated together in terms of economic planning, in terms of various social or economic programs, and also with the hope that in trying to achieve this, certain political units could be created. We have as a long-term objective the possibility of a United States of Africa.
Would you affiliate with the Arabs or the northern half of Africa?
In our present attitude, we regard that countries like Egypt, Tunisia, Morocco, the Sudan, which I think you are referring to, are part of Africa. And consequently, it is quite possible that a workable unit could be created in the north, and which later on would probably associate with other units in the rest of Africa.
Yes. You have said that you would offer Europeans the hand of friendship. Well, I believe at the Accra meeting in December, you said Europeans should scram out of Africa. Now, what did you mean by that?
I am very glad that you raised this point, because I think it is often difficult for us to be sure that we are correctly reported. And I want to take this opportunity to say exactly what I said. I said at Accra that in contrast to the 1884 Berlin Conference, the Accra Conference was convened to unite Africa, to create the African community. And whereas the Berlin Conference started what history has referred to as the scramble for Africa, in Accra we were meeting to state in definite terms to the colonial powers, not European individuals, to the colonial powers, that they would have to scram out of Africa.
I have also heard you reported as saying that you are not for Africa for Africans only, that all would be equal before the law. Is that true?
This is true, except I want to qualify that statement by saying, whereas Africa for Africans is quite a logical and a satisfactory phrase to use, the qualification is that it is dependent on one's definition of African. Now, so long as the definition of African includes any person, regardless of his color, who has decided to make Africa his home, I do not see why anyone should quarrel with us. And I want to submit that when Europeans emigrate to Australia, they call themselves Australians. When they emigrate to Canada, they are quite content to be called Canadians. I see no reason why they should be ashamed to be called Africans.
Let us hope that change there will be. But this change cannot be in terms of pious resolutions and words. It's got to be translated into action. For it is only then that we shall know that there is a definite departure from the past, and that America intends to take on a new role, to stand for the things which
Well, it is pretty obvious that the British and Belgian governments have been very much involved in the conspiracy in the secession of Katanga. It appears to us, those of us who have looked at the Katanga situation, that the British and Belgian governments, including the French government to some extent, and Portugal, are very much interested in safeguarding the various interests, financial and business interests, mining interests in Katanga, rather than in the protection and safeguarding of the national security and unity of the Congolese people.
Now, sir, you as a leading Pan-Africanist have always objected to foreign interference in Africa. Now, wouldn't you say that the United Nations campaign against Katanga and against Mr. Shombe amounted to foreign interference?
Not at all. On the contrary, the United Nations was invited to the Congo by the central government. The United Nations did not intervene until invited. And at present, they are acting in the Congo, firstly on the advice of the African states at the United Nations, and secondly, on the advice and in consultation and cooperation with the central government of the Congo. Our criticism has been that the United Nations has been restrained too much in its actions in Katanga by world powers. That again includes Britain, Belgium, France, who do not wish to see United Nations take decisive action, again because they wish to protect their interests, the interests which are behind Shombe's secessionist tactics.
Do you see any future for Mr. Shombe in the Congo Unified Government?
That very well depends. At the moment, most of us think of him as a crook whose word can never be trusted, but the future should be left to the Congolese people themselves.
Voice from Africa. Tom Mboya of Kenya.
A human struggle. The struggle in Africa is one for nothing less and nothing more than the eradication of poverty, disease, and ignorance. And in this context, you and ourselves are all engaged in the same struggle that can aptly be summarized in terms of a struggle for political freedom, for economic opportunity, and for human dignity. This is my message to you. And I and millions of other people join you today in solidarity for the success of the struggle in which we are all involved. Thank you.
A voice from America. Martin Luther King.
As I stand here and look out upon the thousands of Negro faces and the thousands of white faces intermingle like the waters of a river, I see only one face. That is the face of the future. Yes, as I gaze upon this great historic assembly, this unprecedented gathering of young people, I cannot help thinking that 100 years from now, the historians will be calling this not the Beat generation, but the generation of integration.
It was 1959 when I learned that there was a program between Honorable Mboya and the Kennedy of the United States of America. I didn't know what to do when I was taking my studies. I inquired the program. I was told it's an arrangement between Honorable Mboya, late Mboya, with President Kennedy, that children or students who did not have an opportunity to continue with their education here in Kenya can apply from American colleges and universities. And when they are admitted, the Kennedy's family will airlift the students to America. It so happened that I had just finished my London matriculation examination, of which I was accepted by the same program to go to America. We were picked from different areas and we met in the plane. It was difficult to know who is who going where. Until we arrived in New York, four boys, Frank Namtete, Samuel Ngola, and Elliston Kiwinda Mongola. And we were announced to be boarding to Little Rock, Arkansas. My flight is a famous one. It was through media nicknamed the great famous flight of 81 students. I'm thankful for American education and the arrangement made by Mboya and Kennedy that not only myself, many of the Kenyans who came back after that program came to teach. Others went in the government to do something else, and I think the program is, if I can say, if I know any program was geared to open the relationship between the Kenya government and the American government. And today we are proud to say from 1959, because I traveled with a gentleman called Obama, who is the father of the President of the United States, the program can continue if I may be asked. Kenyatta University College, I was appointed by the Teacher Service Commission to go and complete a program called S1 Teachers to teach secondary schools. I went over there, completed it, 1975. So I was transferred to Thogoto Teachers College. Thogoto Teachers College, I have taught 13 years. That's where I was as a lecturer, chaplain, and the head of religious department for 13 years. Then I retired.
Kenyatta has just been allowed to give his first press conference since his conviction 9 years ago, and Nigel Ryan flew to Maralal to interview him for this program.
Mr. Kenyatta, some people here are afraid that your release from custody would be a signal for more tribal violence in Kenya.
That is not so.
You think there is absolutely no danger of...
No danger at all. There's only imaginary danger.
How would you summarize your policy?
Political policy? I am an African nationalist. wanting my people to have their own independence, just like any other country. I don't think there is any reason why Kenya will not get her independence today. Look at Tanganyika, look at Somaliland, look at Sudan just next door. I don't think these territories are more advanced than Kenya. I do not think so. The only thing is that there are some stubborn people in Kenya who do not want Africans to get their freedom. I have dedicated my life to the service of my people, and no material gain or anything else which will make me move from that line. That is, I'll continue to fight for the freedom of my people as long as I live.
In Nairobi, the crisis has hit business, and capital is leaving the country at the rate of £1 million a month. The Asian middlemen have suffered worst of all. Many have had to shut up shop or cut prices drastically to stay in business. Africans too are out of work, many of them Kikuyu tribesmen recently released from prison. Outside the labor exchange, crowds of them gather daily, unable to find jobs. On the surface, Nairobi is still prosperous and peaceful. But there's no doubt in anybody's mind that independence must come. The only question that remains to be resolved is when.
When would you like to see Kenya independent?
Well, I don't care any day. Immediately.
I would very much like to see it independent when the government here and in England consider that the Africans have sufficient knowledge to run it successfully and bring prosperity to the country.
As long as I can see Northern Frontier is very behind, I don't think Kenya is able to get independent at this moment, but unless another 20 years' time.
Independent next year, and Kenyatta must be released immediately.
Anytime, even now, if possible.
Any time at all?
Anytime.
Well, I think as a businessman, and I think I can also talk for the majority of other business people, well, the sooner the better. But of course, there is a big if about it. We've got to have responsible people that are fit to govern us.
For the moment, the crisis seems to have eased. But among the white settlers in Nairobi and the surrounding countryside, the memory still remains of the 95 Europeans and hundreds of Africans who were hacked to death in the days of Mau Mau violence. If Europeans stay on, will there be more violence? If they leave, will there be another Congo?
At both ends of the scale, views are strong, feelings run high. Can there be a compromise, or must there be a collision? The answer to this depends, I think, on two factors. Will the Africans pause for a moment in the race for independence to realize that in their own best interest they must make it attractive for Europeans to stay on? And for their part, are the Europeans ready in their heart of hearts to accept that Kenya is not a county of the British Isles, but part of a rapidly evolving Africa?
And at last, here comes Kenyatta, flown from detention in Maralal and driven on the last stage of his journey in a police vehicle. Immediately, he's surrounded by reporters, and he gives an impromptu press conference on the steps of his new home.
My first message to my people will be to thank them for what they have done for me and to ask them to keep calm. That is, not to make any trouble in their rejoicing for my return. And through there, we can build a united Kenya.
Mr. Kenyatta, do you think you'll be able to form a political party uniting KANU and KADU?
I do not recognize, favor one of them. I say I belong to both of them.
What are your political ideals, Mr. Kenyatta? What is your political philosophy?
my political philosophy. Well, I think my political philosophy is, well, if I can say, love thy neighbor as thyself.
Who is your neighbor?
I think the world is my neighbor.
I mean, Dr. Vervoort once described his policy as good neighborliness.
Well, that can be sorted out.
If it's made possible for you to take a seat in Legco in the Parliament, would you do that?
There again, I cannot put myself in Legco. That, I leave that to my people. If they elect me to sit in a Legco, I will gladly do so.
Would you like to do that soon, if possible?
As soon as my people want me to do it.
What do you think is the biggest problem facing Africa today?
There's many big problems facing Africa today. That is, 1, we must eliminate ignorance. 2, hunger, disease. Those are the, many other problems, but I think those are the most important.
Kenya is a poor country, and its best future probably lies in the idea of an East African federation with Uganda and Tanganyika, and possibly Zanzibar. One measure of Kenyatta's success will be whether Kenya manages to achieve that. Good night.
Lancaster House has staged many colonial conferences, but this was the first one with picturesque touches. Headdresses with lion's mane cloaks indicate the importance of the tribal leaders. The conference discussed the future of Kenya. Jomo Kenyatta, perhaps the outstanding African in his country, desires a central government. Mr. Ngala, his chief opponent, prefers a federation of regions not dominated by the Kikuyu tribe. The present governor is Sir Patrick Renison. Colonial Secretary Reginald Maudling hopes for a constitution that will guarantee equality before an impartial law, as well as freedom from fear and oppression.
Gentlemen, this conference is of crucial importance to the future of Kenya. Upon the degree of our success or failure will depend the well-being, the livelihood, and perhaps even the physical safety of all the citizens of Kenya, of whatever race or creed. This is the measure of the responsibility that now rests.
We have certainly not solved the problems of Kenya, but I believe we can claim that this conference, by reaching this agreement, has made it possible to find a solution to the problems of Kenya.
Throughout the conference, my party and I never deviated from these objectives, and our primary concern at every moment has been the future welfare of our country, economic, political, as well as social welfare. It is because I believe this so strongly that after very careful consideration, I have agreed to the formation of a coalition government.
Looking back today, I am glad to be able to say that KANU is proud of its contribution at this conference. We are fully prepared to cooperate in the task ahead and invite all other parties and sections to work with us in this noble task. It is necessary that I state clearly at this juncture that KANU shall not tolerate any effort or maneuver to slow down Kenya's independence. We believe that Kenyans are one nation. It is also consistent with the African people's past and present efforts to secure unity. It is also the logical answer to the challenge which Kenya or any new nation must face after independence. The consolidation of independence, urgent economic reconstruction and development, the need to make an impact and have influence at Pan-African and international affairs must be our immediate aim. What we have been struggling for is to redeem our country from the yoke of colonialism.
Harambe! 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 Na mashamba yetu harambe! Na mifugo yetu harambe! Na serikali yetu tukufu harambe!
Well, we inherited a certain situation. It is not of our making. For example, most of the good farming land in the highlands was reserved originally for European farmers. So we have to bring Africans into this area. Most of commerce and trade has been monopolized by Asians, and we now have to bring Africans into this area. Well, this expression cannot just be defined in one word because it represents a lot of things. It represents, for example, our belief that in Africa, the kind of economic, social, and political institutions that make sense must find their meaning in the African setup. That any new organization which we bring up must be based on some traditional concept to life. It must not just be imported from outside. For example, we are clan-minded, we are tribal-minded, in that we are communal in our concept of life. Now, it is necessary that our new institutions are based on this approach,
what we have called in our definition of African socialism, mutual social responsibility. That is, that a person is not just an individual, he's part of a system, he's part of a community. He has responsibilities within that community. He has duties to perform in that community. But in turn, the community has also got responsibility to him. They have duties towards him and his children. This is a very important concept. The other concept is that every person has got equal value and worth. Although some of our people in traditional life had a lot of wealth, but their wealth was not really belonging to them as individuals. They held it almost in trust for the rest of the community. And when any of the members of the community got into trouble, or when he wanted cows to pay dowry, he always looked to this as a possession which he could also have access to. So that there is this element of acknowledging individuals as equal humans in the community. The third one is that every decision was made through consultation and discussion and by a consensus. There was no question of one person deciding for the rest or of a minority deciding for the rest. There was also a proper procedure which laid down how every decision must be taken and at what level different decisions must be taken. There was a procedure by which certain members of the community attained seniority, and by that seniority they were in a position to take certain decisions on behalf of the community. This is the democratic nature of our society. And lastly, there was the element that there was belief in a supreme being. That is, we paid homage to God or gods. We acknowledged there existed a God. We had certain religious functions, not denominational, but born in our tradition. Before we harvest, we have to do certain things to pay homage to God. Before we go to break the ground for cultivation, we pay homage to God. So that there is a distinction, for example, between what we believe in as socialists and what the communists believe in. There is a basic distinction. And the other distinction with other socialists, say the democratic socialists, the Christian socialists of Europe, and the Labour Party in Britain, is that we believe that our socialism must be founded from certain African traditions.
Now, into this Kenya, countries from around the world want to help, to come with their aid. And I understand that you are interested in assistance from abroad, is that right?
This is true, yes.
Now, what kind of aid would you be mostly interested in, Mr. Mboya?
Well, there are two major problems in a developing country like ours. One is the shortage of manpower, and the second is the shortage of capital. Capital both for government activities and also for investment in the private sector. So we are interested in aid, in bringing into the country enough capital to facilitate our development. We are also interested in aid in terms of investments, those who wish to invest in the private sector. But you see, if you have capital alone and you don't have the required manpower, you cannot use the capital. And so we are always also interested that where we get capital, we should also get some technical assistance, people who can help us to carry out our projects. But our long-term objective is to move away from aid so that we can concentrate on trade. Our policy is to minimize aid and expand trade as the years go by. And we are very anxious to develop trade relations with outside countries. I think mostly we want to develop trade relations with our neighboring countries within Africa, because in the final analysis, intra-African trade is more important to us than trade with foreign countries who have a very highly sophisticated economic setup.
How is your thinking when you think of the slogan Africa for Africans? What role will the Europeans and the Indians play in the future Kenya?
Well, I think one thing is to distinguish between what this means in terms of government. What it means in terms of government is that the governments of Africa must be African governments. This is really what it means. Beyond that, we concede, like every other part of the world, that you will have foreigners living amidst our people, and they will be governed by the laws of the land. Also, we have in our constitution provision for other people to become citizens, and there are a number of Asians and Europeans who have become Kenyan citizens since independence, and they will enjoy the same rights as myself or any other African. So to that extent, they are Africans, and they should, just like myself, say Africa is for the Africans. What we're really saying is to exclude foreign powers from interfering in our own local affairs, and also to eliminate colonialism and minority rule from Africa.
So if I came here and settled and behaved well and applied for citizenship and acquired citizenship, could I also be a member of your parliament and also be a minister?
Yes, in fact, we have a white man who is a minister in the Kenya government. We have another one who is a minister in the Tanzania government. There's another one who is a minister in Zambia. So there are many white people who are already members of parliament and even members of the cabinet. In the case of the Kenya minister, Mr. Mackenzie, he's not only a white man, he is a former South African, but he's become a Kenya citizen, and he is accepted by the Kenya people. He is a member of our party, and as a result, he has become a minister since independence.
Now, the East African cooperation between Tanzania, Uganda, and Kenya has been very close, but now Tanzania has broken out more or less and made a strongly socialist goal. Does that affect the cooperation in any way, do you feel?
Well, it does depend on how this is done. So long as there is harmony between our policies, we can continue in a cooperation, although our different countries may take different paths towards socialism. I don't believe that Tanzania is any more socialist than Kenya. It is just that their approach is slightly different from ours. I think that eventually it will be possible to harmonize some of these approaches within the context of East African cooperation.
Are you thinking of nationalizing the banks and these other companies which Tanzania now do?
No, we don't think of doing the same things as Tanzania. Our policy on nationalization has been very well defined in our government paper on socialism. We will only nationalize where it becomes absolutely necessary to do so, and where it is because there is no other means of securing the right responses to the economic needs of the country. But we do not nationalize indiscriminately, nor do we believe in it dogmatically.
It has been said by people who know quite well the problems of the world that the underdeveloped countries become poorer and poorer, and the rich countries become richer and richer, that the distance is growing larger and getting smaller. Is that true to any extent, and how should we overcome this problem, do you think?
This is very true, and I have defined it very, very comprehensively in my speech at Lagos, which I have since published, showing how difficult the terms of aid, terms of loan, and so on have been getting, and also the terms of trade between the developed and developing countries, and also showing how these per capita incomes in the developed countries have been going up, whereas those in the developing countries have been remaining stagnant or even reducing. So there is a definite problem, and it's a problem which must be solved. This is why I have proposed that there is a need for a specific Africa development strategy, and that strategy is one intended to put Africa's development on an emergency basis and not just on a casual basis, as it is today. It is one which will require that the developing countries make special contribution towards an African development fund. It is one which will require that African states themselves contribute towards a general African development program, which requires cooperation between them. This is something I could speak on for a long time, but which I have defined in a comprehensive document, now published as a Kenya government document under the title A Strategy for a Development Strategy for Africa, which you might find to be very interesting reading.
In that connection, I would like to ask you, how do you look upon the development now towards a more common European market? Is that a threat, a further threat to the relation between the richer nations and the poorer nations?
No, I don't think so. I think it is a logical development in Europe. I don't think there is very much of an alternative for Europe but to do this, especially with the end of colonial empires. Europe has to reorganize herself.
Does this affect Africa in any way?
It does, because it means that Africa also must reorganize herself to meet the new European structure, and also that we also, the European concept of the common community must bear in mind that there are other parts of the world and not just Europe, and that Europe owes those parts of the world some cooperation.
So listen, man, I tell you, 49 years ago today. So I was 3.5 years old.
I was 0 years old.
You were 0 minus 0 minus 0.
Yeah.
I was 3.5 years old on July the 5th, 1969. So we used to visit my aunt a lot, and she was the head housekeeper at the YWCA right here on Mamlaka Road. It's still there, right?
Still there.
Yeah, YWCA.
Still there, yeah.
Yeah. All those buildings around it were not there, but the YWCA was this most... we used to love going there because they had a fantastic kitchen, they had great food, and she was the housekeeper, so she had her own apartment in there with a balcony, and we used to hang out a lot. So we were there. Mom took us there on this day. And of course, we were doing our usual thing, eating, watching TV, all that stuff. And then all of a sudden, people were running in the street. My mom and my aunt were on the balcony, and people were running in the streets.
Yeah.
Helter-skelter. And they were wondering, of course, they stopped a couple of them and asked them what happened. And they said they just killed Tom. This was the word, they just killed Tom. And my mom had worked for Tom Mboya at the National Assembly for a little while. So she knew him. So she broke out crying. She was crying.
She just lost a personal friend.
Can you imagine? She was crying uncontrollably. And we were wondering, who is this Tom guy who just got killed? Yeah. Who's this Tom guy? So then later on, it was explained to us. I mean, this guy was the biggest thing since Jomo Kenyatta, I would say. I mean, he was there at the forefront of Kano. He was there at Lancaster House fighting for the rights of newly independent or soon to be independent Kenya. Young man, smart, brilliant, American educated, born in 1930. By 1960, he was hanging out with the Kennedys.
At 30.
At 30, with the Kennedys in Kennebunkport, or where they have their summer home in Boston, Massachusetts.
How brilliant was this guy?
Unbelievable. They believed him. There's pictures of him with John F. Kennedy. John F. Kennedy.
On YouTube.
On YouTube, correct. Incredible. I mean, this guy was so forward-thinking. He really had this country's vision and future in mind. But then at the same time, him being so close to the Americans during that Cold War time, there were other powers that were not very happy. The Brits, for instance, who were about to give up one of their best and prized colonies, were worried that, we might shift too far to the American side. The Soviets then, Russians now, Soviets then were thinking, at Cold War time, this guy is so close to the Americans, could he be CIA? All those theories were coming up. And this guy, Kenyatta first appointed him Minister for Constitutional Affairs and Justice and Constitutional Affairs, first minister. And then later on, he was Economic Planning and Development Minister after that. And the rivalry between Tom Mboya and Oginga Odinga was stark. Oginga Odinga wanted this country to go the socialist way because he was very close to the Soviets then. Tom Mboya, very capitalist, wanting, a capitalist economy, let the economy dictate for itself. So there was a major rifts within KANU then. And of course, there was the talk of succession. Kenyatta, 70-something years old, 75 plus 4, about 79 years old, around, in the late 60s. He was getting old. And people were wondering, okay, so the succession politics, who was going to take over from Mzee, once he passed on? And of course, top on the list, Thomas Joseph Mboya. Top of the list, no question about it. But of course, the cartels, the rivalry, the kitchen cabinet. They had to come in. They had to come in and say, look, is this the way we want to go? By the way, Tom Mboya is the man solely responsible for the famous airlift. In the late 50s, he realized independence is round the corner. We do not have an educated constituency here in Kenya. We don't have anyone who's educated enough to take over once the British leave. So what do? He called his friends, the Kennedys, and he says, hey, we have young, brilliant, smart Africans who would love to further their education, get a university degree. What can we do? Boom, 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 phone calls here, phone calls there. They started the airlift, giving Kenyans, mostly in the beginning was mostly Kenyans, free university education. One of the most famous recipients of this, Barack Obama Sr. Imagine. So why not for Mboya, Barack Obama? Would still be in Kogelo. Barack Obama, this guy, number 44, would still be in Kogelo. Or maybe, whatever. So Barack Obama Sr., Professor Wangari Maathai, a recipient as well. Yes. Dr. Julius Kiano. I remember Kiano. All this thanks to Thomas Joseph Mboya, TJ they called him. So, a whole wave of Kenyans went to America. Obama Sr. ended up in Hawaii, where he went to school there. And met his first wife and married her, and they had Barack Obama in Hawaii, and then he left her and went to pursue I think a doctor's degree at Harvard. So he left the wife and his young son, and he went to Harvard, found another wife, and married. And that's another story for another day. So Mboya, solely responsible. And by the way, history has an uncanny way of repeating itself. His daughter, Dr. Susan Mboya Kidero, definitely, she started the same thing with her foundation. Yeah, she has a foundation now. Right? Exact same thing, helping underprivileged kids to get an education overseas. And they've sent dozens of kids over the last couple of decade and change. Dozens and dozens of kids who have gone on to do fantastic stuff and be employed by some of the Fortune 500 companies around the world. So I tell you, man, the seed does not fall far from the tree, It doesn't. Yeah, so on this day, the man returns from an overseas trip. It was a Saturday. He returns from an overseas trip. And he drives straight, he's driving himself, drives straight to Charney's Pharmacy. Charney's Pharmacy was then on Government Road, which is now Moi Avenue. It was on Government Road. And he knew the Chinese very well who owned the pharmacy.
Okay.
So he gets out of his car. He's chatting to Mrs. Chani outside on the pavement. Chatting, hey, Tom, hey, what's going on? And they're having to chat. Suddenly, Mrs. Chani says, later on, she said, I heard what sounded like a tire burst. And then, all of a sudden, I think she had turned away to walk back into the pharmacy because Mboya had purchased his stuff and she was walking him out, right?
Right.
They chatted a bit. She was turning back to go into the pharmacy and she heard a tire burst and she turned around as Tom Mboya was falling on her.
Oh.
In her hands.
Mrs. Chani.
Yes. And of course, blood everywhere. And this man was, commotion, some guy running down the street. It was chaos. Of course, they call the ambulance, they call the hospital, ambulance arrives, and he's been mortally wounded. There's no way they can revive him.
Yeah.
At the same time, the world's most famous cameraman, Mohammed Mo Amin, just happened to be hanging around, the city, the CBD on a Saturday morning, and he heard the shots. Ran straight towards the shot. As everyone was running the other direction, he ran straight towards the commotion, and he found Tom Mboya right there, lying on the pavement, covered in blood. Ambulance comes in. He jumps in the ambulance with Tom Mboya. He's taking pictures. Click, 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 click. He's taking all these pictures. They get to Nairobi Hospital. By that time, it's too late, and he's pronounced dead. But Mohammed Amin is the one who got those first pictures the next day. It was plastered all over the world. But it was a sad day. 2 years before, one of his best friends, John F. Kennedy, assassinated in the streets of Dallas, Texas. So Mboya was devastated by that death 2 years before. No, 1963, 6 years before, right? He was devastated by that death. 6 years later, 63, right? 68, Kennedy's own brother, Robert Kennedy, who was running for president, gets assassinated as well as he's campaigning for presidency. Gets assassinated, shot. They were at a convention in a hotel. He finishes his speech. He says it's on to Chicago, the next place, and he was number one. He was touted to win and take over the Democratic leadership. As he's going through the kitchen, alternative route through the kitchen to your car.
Yes.
One of the chefs pulls a gun, shoots him point blank. Robert Kennedy. So Mboya has lost JFK in 63. He's lost Robert in 68.
68, 5 years later.
5 years later. On July 5th, 1969, it's Tom Mboya's turn. A tragedy of Shakespearean proportions.
3 good friends dying in the
same decade. In the same decade. And of course, don't forget Martin Luther King, also 68.
68.
Malcolm X, 65.
65.
Oh, the 60s were turbulent years, man. Turbulent.
Assassination.
Yeah. So anyway, Mboya is killed, pronounced dead at the hospital. And then, of course, riots break out. Nairobi and Kisumu. Riots break out. It is madness. 400 policemen are deployed. Mzee Kenyatta calls, immediate arrest of whoever it is, investigation, the whole shebang. 400 policemen deployed. They are plowing. They are combing through the slums of Nairobi. They come up with a guy 72 hours later. Come up with some guy. Nahashan Jenga, they called him. He was a former KANU youth winger who used to extort Indians for money.
All right.
That was his thing. He was a bully around town. Arrest him, and they take him to trial. In the trial, he says, oh no, Mboya was trying, one of his arguments, Mboya was trying to overthrow the government and I had to take care of it. And he admitted it. He admitted. But then, as he was being sentenced to death, he turns around and utters the phrase, what about the big man? And of course, the prosecution turns around and says, what do you mean? He says, yeah, what about the big man? I'm just the small man in this. What about the big man? Wow. 49 years later, no one's ever been able to come out and say who the big man was. Of course, there were theories, about people high up in government then.
Yeah.
But nobody has ever come out. Nearly half a century later. Next year will be 50 years since Tom Mboya died. No one has ever come out to tell us, to say something Who killed Tom Mboya and why? More importantly, why?
You know, in his village there is this mausoleum, yeah, and it stands
up in Rusinga.
Rusinga, yeah. There is it's the village is called Luanda Kamasengre village.
Okay.
Yeah, it's in a Rusinga island. There is this bullet-shaped mausoleum that stands there.
You're kidding me.
Can you imagine?
As a stark reminder.
As a stark reminder
of the bullet that felled him.
Can you imagine?
I'm telling you, he would have made a great president after Kenyatta, because he was young. He was 39 years old in 69. 39, can you imagine? Yeah, life, huh?
Moi Avenue.
Moi Avenue was formerly known as Government Road. Right there, man. It's broad daylight. He had come back from Ethiopia, it was actually. Ethiopia. So he decided, let me pass by the pharmacy, pick up a couple of things, and then head home. Imagine if he hadn't gone to the pharmacy. If he had gone straight home. You know, all these theories. What would have happened?
Question is, what if?
What if Thomas Joseph Mboya, TJ, rest in peace.
Rest in peace. You know, they're actually having a memorial.
Is that right?
Yeah, at
today?
The village. Today.
In the village or?
Yeah, his brother Paul Ndiege confirmed.
Oh.
Yeah, they're actually doing that today, and, you know, this is the 49th, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, fantastic.
So they're doing that back in the village.
Oh, nice.
We should go to that village one time. Rusinga Island.
Yeah. It's good, huh?
Just take a photo next to the mausoleum.
Absolutely.
Bullet-shaped.
Bullet-shaped mausoleum.
Can you imagine?
Mausoleum. I tell you, you can't make this stuff up.
You simply can't.
That's what we call a story a day.
While we lost a father, our country suffered a much bigger loss. It lost a hero, an advocate, and a champion.
I can remember that particular midday afternoon in Kitui School. Everything seemed to have come to a standstill. That was how powerful the name Tom Joseph Mboya was, right across the Kenyan nation.
We want to say that Thomas Joseph Mboya continues to live and will continue live forever in our country.
The government appreciates the need to honor Kenyans who have served our country with dedication.
He was so powerful in his speech and in his mind. He wanted complete freedom for the black man. And I think some people felt that when Kenyatta goes, he would be the next president. When it came to the sleeping time, he refused to sleep on the bed. He said, "Why sleep on the bed? I know I'm dying soon." And we asked him, You know, he astonished us. Mr. Lord, you know, I'm not going to live. On the day he was shot, he had come from Addis Ababa. And he was feeling unwell, so the chemist was there. He went and picked a simple drug, and on coming out, the assailant was there. He shot him point blank there. Somebody was followed and arrested, but I don't think he was punished. Instead, the person was given scholarship to study in the same university where I went. I think he was assassinated because he had this one, his brain. Humphrey Slade, who was the Speaker of National Assembly, said, Mboya is dead. It will take you Kenyans 100 years before you have that beautiful brain on him. I'm saying it without fear or favor. That man wanted Kenya to be a peaceful country, equitable distribution of Kenya's wealth to all Kenyans. I think that's what made JM also test the bullet of the gun. I hope somebody will look for a place and put JM somewhere.
Mboya left a wife and 5 children. He is buried in a mausoleum located in Rusinga Island, which was built in 1970 with a street named after him, and now a statue in his honor. But still, Sheth is not a contented man.
This has come sometimes a little too late, but we are glad we are standing here to celebrate this. Since I saw this, I've been trembling here. I don't know what to do, to weep or to rejoice, I don't. But I think it's a great act of respecting a hero, a political hero,